Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined by Thassos Frangeskou, one of the members of the This Is Mappa Cypriot Football Podcast. Thassos, thank you very much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on. I've followed this account for quite a while, especially since the earlier podcast on Cypriot football that you did with Abob Giniras. So yeah, it's great to be on.
Thanks very much, mate. That's good to know. And yeah, the Apop Kinaras episode was brilliant. It was a while ago now, right enough. So thank you very much for your support and following us since then. Of course, that means we are going to be doing another episode on Cypriot football. It's going to be a bit more of a positive one than the Apop Kinaras show. This is going to focus on AEK Larnaca and specifically talking about their relationship with the merger that they underwent to become AEK Larnaca today, which is a little bit different to how a few other football clubs normally go around it, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But just before we do so, Thassos, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself first of all?
So as people can probably tell from my name and in ending in os, I'm originally from Cyprus, but brought up born in the UK. We have a nickname for people who are Cypriot ethnicity but from the UK. We're called Charlies in Cyprus. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know where that nickname comes from, but that's what we are. We're called Charlies. So obviously, being English speaking, I got together with another person who's involved in talking about Cypriot football called Stel. We do the This Is Mappa podcast, where we talk about what goes on in the league in Cyprus every week. I gotta say, we try and keep it below an hour. We're never able to do that just because of all the stuff that happens. We've been doing that for 2 years now. We must be hitting on 2 years. And the interest in Cypriot football, to tell you the truth, I'm actually quite surprised at how many people have been interested in it, because obviously, the island is very small. Maybe 1 million people altogether population-wise. I guess, football in Cyprus, at least for people in England and abroad, kind of the Cypriot diaspora, isn't really popular. They normally end up mostly being Arsenal or Tottenham fans. But yeah, the interest is picking up, especially, with some famous players going over there to either finish their careers or start coaching. And just surprised by the popularity of at least listening to what's going on.
No, I can understand that, and I think it's interesting because I think, especially after Cyprus beat Ireland, which was quite a big shock at that time, and kind of a sign at that point that Cyprus as a national team were on the up, there's always been this exoticism around the country. And I think obviously you've also got that element of loads of people from, who are military being based in Cyprus. There's lots of different reasons why people kind of look at Cyprus as being a league that they're intrigued by, but they don't necessarily explore. And I think that's what's quite good about podcasts like yourself and accounts like yourselves on X, is that you guys are actually promoting the game pretty well. And, during lockdown, you had people doing shows about Estonian football and all these other different countries that don't get really much attention in the UK started to pop up. Yeah, I mean, it's great work that you guys do, and you're right in saying that there has always been this intrigue about the Cypriot League, I think because a lot of big names go over there as well. And of course, we always see the teams competing in European football and on the European stage, and I think this probably applies to the club that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, of course. I mean, AEK's recent history has a lot of European football situations occurring. I mean, they went to West Ham in London. What is that? Not last season now, the season before, in the last 16 of the Conference League. So yeah, the people are getting to know AEK Larnaca a bit more, because people, when you talk to them about Cypriot football, they normally mention Apoel or Omonia, or if they're a bit more into their football, they'll maybe mention Anorthosis as well.
Yeah, I mean, you also had Aris Limassol going unbeaten against Rangers last season, which was incredibly impressive as well.
Yeah. I'm sure people were very happy with that run against Rangers.
Yeah, and Cypriot football's kind of, I suppose that this kind of comes into the period that we're talking about, because we discussed it in the Apokinaras Payas episode as well, where there was this period in Cypriot football where money was really flooding into the game, but not a lot of clubs were really surviving. It was all done on a very short-term basis, and there wasn't a lot of building for the future. But it seems anyway that things might be levelling out a little bit more after that. But the AEK Larnaca were founded in 1994. That was after a merger of two clubs who historically had been based in Larnaca. That was EPA Larnaca and Pezoporikos. And what kind of I've had AEK Larnaca on my radar for quite some time. That's obviously why I got in touch. But what really sold me on them was when you came back to say to me that to celebrate their recent 30th anniversary of being a club, they promoted it as being 30 years of life, but 100 years of history. And what's quite interesting about that is that you very, very rarely get clubs who are born from a merger actually acknowledging the merger itself like that. And it's actually quite a good thing as well, because it's shown people that, yes, while we as an entity have only been around for 30 years, there are other clubs who were around for much longer who are actually a part of our history as well, and that has to be celebrated.
Yeah. So the story of a team playing football in Larnaca is quite a complex one. There's all kinds of mergers and splits happening all over the place. As you kind of spoke with the Abobginiras episode, it's just endemic in Cypriot football culture. It kind of occurs a lot. But yeah, especially in Larnaca, the town kind of football-wise, especially at the beginning of the Cyprus FA's history, was kind of ignored a little bit. So there's kind of like this outsider temperament as well in Larnaca with regards to the teams there. Obviously now with the merger, there's only the one team, and there's a bit of pride in Larnaca about this one team trying to be more successful, especially, you've got your refugee teams like Anorthosi and Nea Salamina that are based in Larnaca as well. So there's a big footballing culture, but there's only one team in Larnaca for the size of the town as well, especially with there's been a big boost of people moving to Larnaca over the last 20, 30 years. So the town's grown quite a bit in size. So yeah, there's a big push towards, more community atmosphere with the team, kind of like what they had originally when they first started out in the 30s and the 40s.
That is really interesting. You touched on a couple of things there that I'm quite glad that you mentioned, actually. So I think towards the end of the Apokinaras episode, we only very briefly touched on the fact that a lot, if not every single football club in Cyprus, or the fans at the very least, has some kind of political element to it in terms of how the fans express themselves, which can't really be separated. It's kind of ingrained in Cypriot football culture somewhat. So obviously you've got migrant teams, you've obviously got the Turkish part of Cyprus as well. So there's a lot of different elements and a lot of different layers to how fans express their identity and how they go about showing that on the stands.
Yeah. So we've got Anorthosis and Nea Salamina. So they're both from Amohostos or Famagusta in English. And that town is basically a ghost town in the occupied area. It's right on the border. It's next to Paralimni and Brodara and Ayanaba, the places that, say, people from abroad would be more familiar with. And whilst those two teams are from the same town, the politics behind the two teams are opposite. So now Salamina are more left-leaning, whereas Anorthos is more right-leaning. And that has, again, an effect of how those teams kind of behave outside of the football pitch as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of the things to consider whenever we discuss football in Cyprus. Obviously, as we said in the show before, not everyone likes football and politics, and that's fine. And there is a debate there as to whether or not football should be involved in politics, but that's like a completely different argument to the fact that ultimately in some places it just is. But to go back to AEK Larnaca, obviously they founded in 1994, as you mentioned, and as we've spoken about before, there is a large culture of merging clubs within Cyprus. What was the reasons behind it? Was it just, as you kind of mentioned, to create one large club to compete in Larnaca and to represent them, or were there other motivations behind it as well?
So the actual reasons is more financial because of the size of the town. Having two, actually, it would have been three clubs at the time, as well as obviously the refugee teams also being based in Larnaca, there wasn't enough of the fan support to finance two teams in the first division. And there was also, I can't remember if it was Eba or Bezoborigo, but one of them was about to be relegated as well, which would have basically completely destroyed the team because they were already in financial dire straits. Now, because both teams weren't able to compete financially and on the pitch as the times were going on, the boards of the two teams voted and took the decision to merge the two teams into one, kind of just to have a team that is able to compete in the league from Larnaca. So twofold, with it being the financial as well as the competition reasons.
Yeah, that makes a bit of sense. I think we've touched on that before, the financial reasons why this might be the case. I mean, you could almost say that they were almost successful off the bat. I mean, they did kind of hit the ground running, I suppose. So the season after they founded, so the 95-96 season, they came runners-up in the Cypriot Cup, so they had a pretty decent run there. And then, I think maybe 9 or 10 years after founding, they actually won the Cypriot Cup as well. And then another 10 years, they became runner-up in the Cypriot Championship. So they did start off pretty well, and now they've kind of established themselves as a top Cypriot club. You'd imagine that they are going to be pushing and may eventually win the title, but they've proved themselves to be a pretty good cup team, and they've actually got a pretty decent European record as well. I mean, I think they've won something like just under 30 games in the Europa League and only lost around, I think maybe half of that, maybe 15 or 16, and then drawn the rest. So for a team that's only been around for 30 years, you can't say it's not been an impressive showing from them, you know?
Yeah, their European record is very impressive. I mean, if you have a look at the records for quite a few Cypriot teams, you can see there's a big old number next to the L. But yeah, the aeklarnaca have been very impressive in Europe. I'd say this season's been very disappointing for them in Europe. You know, they got knocked out in the first qualifying round for the Conference League against Paxi, I think, in Hungary. And I mean, they hired the coach that they had for starting the season, basically lasted those two matches, and they got rid of him because of how disappointing the results and the performances were. And then they've brought in Henning Berg after that. So yeah, but again, last season they ended up sacking Ultra, who was the coach who got them into the Conference League against West Ham after a very poor performance at the beginning of the league. And then Ran Ben Shimon, who's now the Israeli national team coach, kind of picked up that team, and they went on this 15-game run of just winning. And then, the story last season, a bit dramatic, where last game of the season, there was 1 point separating Aboel and AEK. No, I think, they were on the same points, and it was just being done by results between the teams. Aboel and AEK were playing each other last game of the season, and AEK, so they needed to win the game to win the league. And the game ended up being a 1-1 draw, which gave Aboel. I'm quite happy with the result. I'm an Aboel fan. A 1-1 draw meant Aboel won the league. Last game of the season, a very, very closely contested league last season as well. The drama involved there, and I think so. I mean, yeah, AEK have been very successful up to a point. It's just getting up to taking that last step. They haven't been able to do it just yet.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It kind of comes back to how successful can you be if you're always coming second, you know? And I do understand that, but at the end of the day, they've been a club for 30 years. They've won a cup. I think they've won a couple of cups actually, and they're now pushing towards the title and seem to be they've always kind of been in an upward trajectory. And this is what's quite interesting for me, because they're relatively speaking, they're not an old club. They're not really a new club anymore, but they're not an old club. But they've managed to do so well in such a short period of time, but not in the way that a lot of the other clubs have done that we've spoken about on this podcast that have been founded, done incredible things within 5 or 10 years, and then folded immediately because they basically burnt out too quickly. Do you understand? It's been like they were founded, they've been moderately successful comparatively, and now they've kind of stabilised. So it's quite interesting, particularly within the context of Cypriot football, which we'll come on to talk about as being very fluid, especially with some of the money that goes into it as well. Not that this doesn't always happen, and in some ways Larnaca can be viewed as a bit of an outlier in some of those cases as well. You know, just from the club founding up until now, having watched them, when they did found, what were your expectations of them? And secondly, how have things actually been for them as a fan of the Cypriot League and following the Cypriot League? How has it been actually kind of watching them develop and begin to stabilise over the last 30 years?
So something you mentioned there was very interesting, where you mentioned about a team kind of being merged, doing gangbusters for the first 4 or 5 years because they've had all this investment, and then kind of fall apart after that. So that actually almost happened to AEK following that first cup win, because they did exactly that. And they actually, at one point, they actually got relegated as well. So they got relegated, and that made them like proper suffer financially. Now, I have to throw this in because what a fact. But in that one season, they were in the second division because somebody involved in the team was friends with his agent. They managed to sign Ivan Campo after he left Bolton.
Wow.
For a season, yeah.
Nice.
Now, obviously, because it's the second division in Cyprus,
Yep.
we're talking, 15 years ago?
Yep.
There's not much footage or photos of him being there other than him
That's
being announced. Yeah, exactly. So they brought him in, they got promoted, and when they got promoted as well, they were taken over by, I can't remember the president's first name of the club, but his surname is Garabadakis, is the current president, and basically he took over the club while in these financial dire straits. Players weren't being paid, things were not happening for the club at all. He took over the club, and as soon as he took over the club, he started talking about building a new stadium. So all the players are like, what's this guy talking about? How's he going to build a new stadium? He needs to pay everybody first. And he somehow managed to get the finances of the club to such a state where not only was he able to pay all the outstanding debts, he was able to bring in some very high quality players, and he was also able to build the stadium. And kind of the finances of the club is the more surprising thing, because the finances of the club are such that they're actually, they're in the green, which is a very surprising thing for a club in Cyprus normally. And and they've done it very sustainably as well. Their success that they've got is great for the city of Larnaca. It's great for the country as well, because obviously what they're doing in Europe. The one thing kind of negatively that affects the team, and you could say the Cyprus in general, kind of in football terms, is the team basically has no Cypriots in it.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. So in Cyprus, there's a rule where the teams have to play a minimum or start a minimum of 2 Cypriot players, or players who have been registered with the Cyprus FA under the age of 18 for one season. So basically, they're trying to say, you need to play Cypriot players. And AEK, since that rule has been brought in, have been fined every single week for not playing any. Like they might, there's a couple of weeks where they play maybe one player. They changed the rules recently at the Cyprus FA to kind of reduce the fine if you play one Cypriot player, but to increase the fine if you don't play any. And AEK have basically got this 37-year-old who used to play for Sunderland called Valentin Robert, And he's basically lived in Cyprus long enough. He's actually played international games for the Cypriot national team, so he counts as a Cypriot. So they only pay the lower fine now on a technicality.
Okay.
So yeah,
That's crazy.
that's. But the club keeps getting awards for kind of their youth team setup. So while they've got this great youth team setup, they're not playing anybody from their youth teams.
Not playing any of the youth. That's crazy. We've touched on this in the episode with KV Ostend when you've got football associations, the Belgian one in that case, that they will do things almost performatively. So it's like, obviously Larnaca are quite happy to be fined every week because they can obviously afford it, so they're not going to change anything to do it. And the FA are just like, yeah, we'll just keep doing it. We're not going to increase the punishment. We're not going to increase the... Do you know what I mean? So it's just very passive, and that's when clubs know they can get away with murder, basically. But that's quite a strange dynamic where they're praised for their youth team setup, but don't actually play any of their youth players.
Yeah, I mean, they're not the only team to do it.
Mm.
My team does it as well, which I'm not happy about, Abuel. It's Abuel, Aris, Bafos, but those are the big corporates, and you'll notice as well those are the teams that are qualifying for Europe. So
yeah, exactly.
yeah. So yeah, there's a question to be asked about how sustainable that rule is, considering the teams are finding success flaunting the rule. And not, just paying the fine and winning the games. I think basically is the call to action there. There's a couple of teams that tried to do the same thing and didn't work out for them at all. And then they ended up driving the team into some bad financial dire straits. And the main one I'm thinking of is a team called Garmiodissa. They were bought by a Russian originally. He was like, okay, I'm going to throw a load of money at the club, try and get them into Europe. Got all these foreign players in, and then they ended up finishing like 8th or 9th both seasons he had the club. And then he was like, well, I've had enough of this, and then left the club. And
okay.
Now they've got some difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that could be an episode for another time. Is that a lot of very rich people from all over the world see clubs in Cyprus as a bit of a plaything, and they just kind of throw money at it, thinking they can easily get into Europe or whatever, and then get bored, pull their money out. And this comes into what we're going to talk about. The club end up folding, and the fans end up losing the club. And I think that's what I wanted to move on to next, is obviously being a merger club, it can be sometimes difficult to attract fans. But of course, Larnaca are representing the entire town city of Larnaca, so you'd imagine that their fan base is pretty strong. What are the fans of AEK Larnaca like?
Yeah, so prior to the teams merging, there was talk for a few years of the teams merging, and both teams had both camps yes and no for doing it. And a lot of the people in the no camp for both clubs kind of after a few years ended up following the club anyway, because it's the Larnaca club, so we're going to follow them. There are fans of both clubs, like for instance my dad. He was, I think, I can't remember which one it is, and he's going to kill me for it, because he obviously one of them is his club, and the other one he absolutely hates them. I think it was Bezoborigos anyway. He was a Bezoborigos fan, and as soon as the merger happened, he was like, he was screaming about the colours. What's this green and yellow thing that they're doing? This isn't my club. I don't know what this is. I'm not bothered with this anymore. And then he kind of fell off Cypriot football, just stopped following it. On the other side, his brother, my uncle, he's a season ticket holder at AEK right now. So yeah, and he has been since the beginning. So there's, I'd say 70-75% of the people who were either Bezoborigos or EBA fans are now with the team. And then obviously, you've got the youngsters in the city. They've only got really the one team if they want to support a team from their city. There's another story to be said about Algi, but the team from AEK are basically the team in Larnaca, so a lot of the younger people are turning out towards them. Now they're building up the stadium. I can't remember the attendance, the full capacity of the stadium. It's not a big stadium by any means. I think it's something like 7,000. Don't quote me on that though. I'm bad at the numbers for it. But the ultra stand is quite full most games. They call themselves the Larnaca Guardians. They're very loud, very passionate support. Unlike a lot of, say, other ultras groups in inverted commas, they haven't been as prolific in causing trouble.
Okay.
But yeah, there have been some incidents, as there always is in Cyprus. As well, I mean, let's say Eastern European football, there's a lot more incidents outside and inside the stadium between fans than, say, kind of in Western Europe. But we kind of get a glimpse of that in Cyprus as the sports judge kind of hands out fines every week.
I see.
And you can kind of see they kind of list it out. Like, for instance, there's a joke we have on, and this is Mappa Podcast, Nea Salamina fans will not stop spitting at referees. That's one of them. The Apollon fans like to do pitch invasions. And aeklarnaca fans, they like to set fire to the opposite team's jerseys. So they go and buy a jersey, set fire to it, and that causes some trouble.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, they have a rivalry with Anorthosis because obviously it's a refugee team. Historically, it's a big club. So Anorthosis being based in Larnaca and being like this historically bigger club, they try and form a rivalry between the two teams. There has been some more intense trouble, especially in the recent years between the two teams. The Cyprus FA has actually agreed for no away fans to be at the matches between the two teams for this season. Yeah. And that's been an endemic issue in Cyprus in general, the violence at football matches. But yeah, between those two teams specifically, it was agreed that they weren't going to have away fans at the games.
Mm-hmm. That's a shame. You know, obviously the last few years at the old firm, away fans haven't been allowed at games, but it's not for the same reasons. It's not really for the violence. It's become this really petty tit for tat. You know, we weren't there, so you're not going to be here. Allocations have been cut, so it's only 800 fans allowed and all this kind of stuff. And it is sad to see, but obviously I'm a football fan in a country where there's minimal fan violence compared with, say, Cyprus or Argentina, the other big example of away fans not being allowed in stadiums. So, you know, it's for different reasons. So to that extent, I can somewhat understand it. But, you know, it is the case, as it is across world football, that sometimes it's a small minority that ruin it for others. But I mean, the reason that I actually asked you about the AEK Larnaca fans is, I suppose this kind of comes into a wider discussion on supporting merger clubs, and the example that came to my mind was the merger between Inverness Thistle and Caledonian FC to make Inverness Caledonian Thistle back in the 90s, where there's a lot of people who just outright refuse to follow Inverness Caledonian Thistle because they didn't agree with the merger, and they still do that 30 years on. But obviously in this case, the Larnaca fans have backed them, they've supported them, whereas Inverness, which is similar, that's the only club in the city, the only senior club in the city, I should say, a lot of people still don't go out to support them. So there's differences in football culture there. And I think it kind of comes back to the conversation that we had with John Leonidou in that episode, is that the fan culture in Cyprus can be very fluid because many people have become used to their clubs folding or merging or changing names or money being put into them and then money being taken away and they're relegated. It's always kind of stuck in my mind, and I wondered to what extent that might be true, that a lot of football fans in Cyprus, not so much the big teams, but a lot of football fans are effectively waiting for the next iteration of their club to form.
So yeah, this is the interesting thing. For instance, for Apop Giniras Beyas, for instance. So they folded, they merged with AEK Larnaca, and with those two teams, you ended up with a team called AEP. So basically the same thing as AEK, but AEP for Bafos. And then that changed hands and then became Bafos FC, which is what and then you can kind of see what they're doing in Europe at the moment, and they're top of the league and they haven't lost a game yet. In fact, they've only dropped 2 points all season so far. We're on match day 11. The next match day, I think, is match day 11 off the top of my head. So Bafos have had this kind of turnover of teams like no one's business. Another one, even with our Bob Guineras Bellas, Bella at the moment have a team called Bella 2014.
Okay.
Because they were reformed again in 2014. The club almost went bankrupt last season or the season before. And then a Portuguese investment company has now taken them over, I think. So there's all kinds of stuff going on in the background there. You've got AEK Larnaca. At first they started off as AEK Larnaca. This team is called the Immortals. The nickname is the Immortals, and they don't die. they went the same way as EBA and Bazoborikos. Financially, it was an absolute mess. And they basically folded, and then 2-3 years later, a fan of AEK Larnaca reformed the team and based them in a suburb outside Larnaca called Oroglini. It's between Larnaca and Ayanapa. And AEK Oroglini, he pumped the team full of money, like the owner of our Bob Guineras Bellas did, got them into the first division. They survived in the first division for I think something like 10 years. They got relegated, and then obviously loads and loads of financial trouble until they folded 18 months ago. They folded 18 months ago, I think. Yeah, there was a big to-do because they released a load of players, obviously because the club folded. But the club folded on like 28th of January. So all these players got released, and then nobody could sign them until the summer after. So there was 6 months where these players didn't basically earn anything, plus the 6 months that they hadn't been paid for by the club before it folded. So it was a big mess. And then this last month, AEK Larnaca is back playing non-league football. And the first team they played, they beat the team that they were playing 12-0. So it looks like somebody has found some more money to bring the club back to where it was previously, hopefully. So yeah, the Immortals.
Literally the Immortals. It is just quite interesting though, because obviously you can look at it in two ways. Maybe you've got this culture where people are quite happy to just support whatever club comes up. And a lot of people would maybe look at that and think, well, that's quite problematic. There's a lot of issues within that. Can you really call yourself a football fan? But then on the other side of it, maybe it's more about these people choosing to support the club that represents their city or a continuation of their values. Do you know what I mean? So there's different ways that you can look at it as well. And I don't think it's fair to say that these people are just waiting for the next club to come along because they like a Rami or they like, getting drunk and shouting stuff in the terraces. But it might be a case that they just like supporting the club that represents their city and their ideals. And ultimately that's part of what football is,
Yeah, so I mean this is the part of it again where the politics comes in. So if you don't like the politics that AEK Larnaca have, I mean they haven't really specified as a club. They don't really put out what their politics are. But if you don't like what they're presenting, then if AEK Larnaca is presenting something else that you more agree with politically, then you're going to end up following them. It's a bit tribal. It's more tribal than normal in Cyprus because obviously football is always very tribal. You've got Rangers, Celtic, you've got Arsenal, Tottenham, Villa, Birmingham. You got all this stuff occurring, but on top of that, because of the political side of things, people end up following a club as well because they represent what they believe the world should be like.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really, really good point as well. Tribal is the correct term to use. And as you've said there, you will get people who believe in the club, and then you'll get people who believe that what they think the world should be like. And I think it's really, really important to remember that. But it's all part of this really interesting nuance of being a football fan in Cyprus and supporting a club. And I did just want to touch on that because it's something that's always been in the back of my mind, and it's a really, really interesting concept, particularly where heritage is concerned. Just, this idea that it doesn't really matter about the entity, it matters about what the entity stands for. And I can't remember what book it was that I was reading. It might have been, I think it was 1312 Amongst the Ultras by James Montague. And he kind of said something similar. And that's why you'll see ultras in like Eastern Europe turning up to like basketball games and stuff like that, is that they don't just support the football club, they support the idea of whatever the name represents,
Yeah. That's exactly right. So, for instance, AEK as a club is a sports club. So they've got the football team. They've also got a basketball team, which is doing very well as well. So there's a lot of support for the basketball team as well. There's, if you look at AL, which is so Sports Union of Limassol, they have a basketball team as well. Now Salamina have got like netball and volleyball and things like that. So, and all these fans, if there's any issues like with fans being blocked for going to a game in one sport, they just go, okay, well, we'll go support the team in this sport instead.
Yeah, no, as I said, it is just quite interesting in itself. But I suppose to come back to AEK Larnaca, obviously, as I mentioned, when they promoted their anniversary, they did it with the tagline of 30 years of life, but 100 years of history. And as I said, this isn't something that you normally see clubs do, and acknowledging where their merger came from and the clubs that ended up founding them. Again, there's different reasons within that. Maybe the clubs that merged are completely different to how the club is now and all that kind of stuff. But it's really interesting, especially from a heritage perspective, how they are acknowledging this and kind of writing it into their own history, the acknowledgement that they are a merger club.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily a strange thing in Cyprus. So, for instance, Paphos FC have got the same thing kind of going. They're an amalgamation of different teams that have merged together and changed names umpteen times. But the emblem for Paphos FC is freedom fighter called Evagoras Palligaridis. Now, the reason they've got that is because one of the teams that was formed in the merger from the 90s was Evagoras Bafou, and their emblem was basically the face of this freedom fighter. So AEK doing what they're doing isn't necessarily something completely different for Cyprus. I can see why it's strange not strange, but interesting to look at outside of Cyprus. But for Cypriot football, it's a fairly standard thing to kind of look at. Again, with the 30 years life, 100 years history that they've done, there's been a bit of ridicule from opposition fans, obviously being like, well, no, EBA won leagues as EBA, Bezoborigos won cups as Bezoborigos. You can't claim those. That's not your team.
Okay, that's there is substance in those arguments, I suppose.
Yeah, there is, but yeah, obviously, they're well within their rights to celebrate being a merger of these two clubs, because without those two clubs, you wouldn't have this club. So they can celebrate it. It's within their rights to celebrate it. And talking about them celebrating this as well, if people are more interested in kind of the history before they became AEK, they've got on their Instagram account, they have a 2-part kind of documentary video of how the team was formed, what happened with the merger. Now, it's all in Cypriot Greek, so because a lot of the people being interviewed are Cypriots.
Yes.
So there's Greek people maybe will have some trouble understanding what's being said as well. But the good thing is it's subtitled, so you can see what's being said in English as well.
Brilliant. That's a really good way of kind of talking about their history and their merger as well. And I suppose to come back to the sort of heritage and historic preservation, not to go too over the top with it, but just for lack of a better term, it's good to see that clubs in Cyprus do this, because often when clubs merge, talking about what the clubs were beforehand is a bit of a taboo, or it only really gets spoken about when the club is celebrating like its anniversary of founding or something like that. Out with these kind of activities, like the documentary and things like that, do clubs in Cyprus do much to acknowledge their history? Otherwise, for example, the clubs that they maybe came from, for example, has any club got museums or anything like that are accessible to the public?
Yeah. That's definitely the case, especially with the bigger teams. So, for instance, Anorthosis have a museum in the stadium that they have in Larnaca, kind of showcasing the team's history and kind of the connection that the team has with Amorostos Famagusta, with the town, and kind of like. With them, it's more important, I think, to celebrate their heritage and history, because it's a refugee club. So there's like a big impetus on, trying to solve the occupation issue, trying to because it's been 50 years now, so there's generations that are from families from that area,
Of course.
that have never seen, well, or they might have seen it, but they haven't seen it as a town bustling, tourism or all that business. So for them to have that museum and connect it to their football team is very important. And then you've got teams like Apoel and Omonia, who've got very celebrated history. They've got their museums as well. As well as mergers, you've got splits. So Bezoborikos was the only team in Larnaca. Then they split Bezoborikos and I want to say Amol, I think they were called. And then they were brought back together, and then they were called EBA, which is Enosis Bezoborigou, and I can't remember what the A is for, but basically it means Union of Bezoborikos and Amol. That's it. That's what the A was for. And then people who were at Bezoborikos left because they disagreed with what was going on with EBA.
Okay.
And then you ended up with Bezoborikos and EBA. And then obviously following the merger, they're all back together again. So yeah, even when the relegation happened for AEK, the people from Bezoborikos were saying, okay, maybe we should split and do Bezoborikos by ourselves again. So there's been this kind of this history with the team in Larnaca being together, splitting up, being together, splitting up, being together, splitting up, and they kind of make light a bit of it as well in the documentary, like the fact that they keep that this keeps happening. So the fact that the team's been together for 30 years is something to celebrate as well, because there's like a union. So yeah, you don't want a team that's called Athletic Union to be splitting up. So yeah.
No, you don't. I actually never thought about. I never thought about that before. That's quite ironic. That's quite funny. No, you absolutely do not want that. Our listeners get a better idea of how ingrained this is into the fabric of football in Cyprus, and that obviously, as outsiders looking in, it might look quite strange. Some people will probably use that overused term "tin pot" to describe it, but actually, it has its uses. It has its benefits. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think that's something that should be scoffed at, because it's something that's a little bit different, that Cypriot clubs and Cypriot fan bases are actually making it work for them.
Yeah, so I mean, the way that I look at it as a bit of like a soap opera, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for other fans in Cyprus. But normally when there's a big to do in like a Western European league, like for instance, there was a big VAR call in the Premier League. I think it was the Newcastle game where the ball looked like it crossed over the line, but VAR said it didn't cross the line when the cross came in. I think it was against Arsenal.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
They went on about that for 3-4 weeks. In Cyprus, that will maybe last an hour, and then there's another thing to scream about. We talked a little bit before the call. There's been this big to-do with the Cyprus FA and Omonia at the moment. The president of Omonia basically came out and set fire to everything by saying how corrupt the Cypriot FA president is. And the Cypriot national team is about to play a game of football tonight against Lithuania. And if they lose that game, everybody's going to forget about what the Omonia president has been saying. So it's most people are kind of looking at it and either ignoring it or saying funny stuff about it. It really is a soap opera. It's like you can't keep hold of a chain of events for too long because there's another fire that needs putting out, down the road. It's it's interesting, but that's kind of one of the reasons why the fan base in Cyprus is a lot more. I won't say flexible because we're not flexible, or forgetful. Let's say. Let's say forgetful.
Yeah, good way of putting it. Okay, good. No, it's quite interesting though, and I think the best way you put it there is that why bother shouting and screaming about something for so long when there's another bigger fire that's going to need to be put out just down the road. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I remember actually John saying to me in that episode as well that a lot of Cypriot clubs will actually, in the sort of post-match press conferences, it won't be the manager, it won't be the president that comes out, but it will be these guys who have been hired to basically be spin doctors and PR agents, spokespeople for the club, which is crazy and something that's actually quite unique.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so a lot of clubs have got a press secretary who will come out and give out. So the manager always has to come out and give a press conference after the game. Normally, it is a statement to talk about the game, very like, oh, congratulations, or to the winning team, or commiserations to the losing team, and we played well, and blah, blah, platitudes. There may be like one or two questions sometimes, unless there's been like a really, really bad result, and then there's like almost like an inquest. But then, the press secretary is the one that comes out at the end of the game on the pitch to give the interview to the TV cameras rather than the coach. Like you said, I haven't thought about it before, but yeah, it is quite strange for that to be occurring.
Yeah, it's just something a wee bit different. Again, it's something that kind of stuck out in my mind. Obviously, with Larnaca still kind of just doing their thing, sort of middling, as you said, they've been having a pretty poor season so far. What do you think the future holds for them? I mean, now that they've kind of stabilised after 30 years, the hope is that they're not going to merge with someone else or fold anytime soon. But of course, you can never really know. These things might just be around the corner.
Yeah, so I mean, like I mentioned previously, the financial outlook for the team is quite rosy at the moment. Although the missing out on more European games might have an effect on how they go forward, at least next season. Saying that, the team is quite financially healthy. There's no debts on the stadium. They don't have a lot of debt especially compared to some other teams. So you'd expect for the near future, there's not going to be any financial issues. What the team and quite a lot of other teams in Cyprus haven't been able to deal with is obviously the new money that's come in to Aris and Paphos. So Aris won the league for the first time 2 seasons ago. And that's based off of a huge amount of investment from a Belarusian, Ukrainian, Georgian. There's a few kind of ex-Soviet bloc country people together that have poured in a lot of money in the club, and I have to say they're doing it sustainably. But based off of what some people are saying, there's a lot of every time we post something about Aris, the GIFs and JPEGs of washing machines come out.
Brilliant.
Paphos have got 2 big Russian investors behind them, kind of a consortium of people that own a couple of football teams around. They also own a club in Moscow and Riga FC in Latvia. And yeah, the traditionally big teams, you can count AEK in that as well, haven't really answered for that investment yet. Although AEK have done very well up to that point. But yeah, it depends to see how far they go this season. Again, like you said, they started poorly. They brought in Henning Berg. Henning Berg has been okay with them so far. They had a poor result last weekend, drawing with a team we'd expect to be relegated. This season, I think they'll struggle to go, top 2. But they'll definitely be in that top 6 kind of split at the end of the season, I think.
Okay, so reason for them to be optimistic then,
For sure.
the sounds of things. Well, I mean, that's a good thing, and as I said, I think one of the things about Cypriot football kind of being a bit exotic and a bit intriguing to a lot of people over here is that you always see the names in Europe and it's always a big shock when one of the teams do well. And I think a lot of people, especially over here, actually probably don't expect Cypriot teams to do as well as they actually do. And I think that's because of the kind of disparaging mindset that exists around football in Cyprus. But, they hold their own for the most part. They are very, very well put together teams. And obviously, because some of the things that we've talked about in this podcast, some people really look down on the league as being a little bit of a circus, but you can't deny that it's absolute entertainment and it's great fun.
I mean, one of the reasons why we do the podcast is because of how interesting it is. Like you said, with watching the circus, watching the car crash, but the teams do well. Again, I got to the last 16 of the Conference League. They got absolutely whooped by West Ham when they did. But, the fact that they got to that point is fantastic. Abuela Champions League quarterfinalists and a Europa League last 16 as well. So, Anorthosis been in the Champions League group stages as well when that was happening. Omonia had a great result against Manchester United as well at one point while Neil Lennon was managing them. So there's a bit of a Western European mentality to kind of like looking down on these leagues, but there's definitely some teams that can do well. Looking outside of football, Cypriot football, you've got the Conference League last season with Olympiacos. A lot of people were saying, that they were going to get nowhere near that final, and then they ended up winning it. So people should pay attention to more than just the Premier League, let's say.
I completely agree with you. And I think that's a great way to end the show, just to talk about their ambitions for the season and how things at AEK Larnaca have been going, and just a reminder that not everything revolves around England or the top 5 leagues as well, or the leagues that we're most exposed to, and I include Scotland in that as well. There's entertaining football out with our circle and our little bubble of football that we live in. But Thassos, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a really good episode. We've had a really, really interesting discussion and pulled out a lot of things that I think a lot of people will be aware of, but don't necessarily know how to explain or talk about. So I hope it's been beneficial for our listeners too. Is there anything that you want to add just before we finish up for today?
So again, I'll just we do the This Is Mappa podcast every week. Normally it's a Wednesday, sometimes it's a Thursday. We do it every week though, and you should be able to find that on YouTube. So that's THISISMAPPA. This is Mappa, and I've got my Twitter account at Flares Gaffes or at Gaffes Flares. I chuck some tidbits in there about Cypriot football, what's happening during the day, and that's it from me really.
Brilliant. We'll put those links to everything in the show notes for this episode so that our followers can go and follow you guys and check out the fantastic work that you're doing. The This Is Mappa podcast is phenomenal, and we'll put all the links to those out on our show notes so people can follow you as well. But thank you very much for coming on, and thank you once again to all of our listeners who tuned in for this episode. Of course, if there's anything that you want us to cover that's related to football history or heritage, please do get in touch. We'll have a chat with you, even if it's something you don't think is relevant to what we do. You never know. So have a conversation with us. We're more than happy to chat with you, and we'll see if it's something that we can fit into the project. You can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage. You can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk, and you can also get in touch with us on BlueSky now. That's just footballheritage.bsky.social, or however it is the handles are over there. We'll cover anything from lost football clubs, club histories, former players, former stadiums, place, identity, fan culture, you name it. Get in touch with us, have a chat with us, and we'll see if it's something that we can get you on to discuss. But for now, Thassos, say goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
And it's a goodbye from me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.